To the Point with Congressman Bill Pascrell, focusing on the concerns and issues facing the families of New Jersey's 9th Congressional District.
Hello, I'm Congressman Bill Pascrell, and I would like to welcome you to this latest edition of To the Point. For centuries, the Passaic River has played a seminal role in our society, not just locally, but nationally. From serving as the lifeline for the 17th century Lenape settlements to powering our nation's industrial revolution, through the night and the might of the Paterson Great Falls, the Passaic River has served a critical economic, environmental, recreational role for generations. Unfortunately, a century of industrialization and development have also left behind toxic sediments, including dioxin, PCBs, heavy metals. In addition, the growth of residential and industrial development has increased the threat of flooding to local communities, causing an estimated $6 billion in destruction in the past 100 years. To help address these formidable challenges, several federal proposals have recently been introduced. Last year, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency announced a $1.7 billion proposed cleanup of the lower 8-mile stretch of the Passaic, representing one of the largest ever in the federal Superfund program. Just last week, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced a $3 billion proposal to build a series of levees and flood walls from Kearney to Totowa to help mitigate flooding on the Passaic. With me today are two outstanding people who helped develop these plans to discuss them in more detail and offer some insight as to what they mean for the Passaic River communities. Judith Enck is the Regional Administrator of Region 2 of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, in cooperation with state and regional authorities in New Jersey, New York, and Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, in 8 federally recognized Indian nations. Judith administers federal programs governing air and water pollution, industrial discharges, and many other federal environmental protective policies. Joining me a little bit later will be Colonel Paul Owen with the Army Corps of Engineers to discuss their efforts to address flooding in the Passaic River Basin. Thank you for being here with us, Judith. It's so great. You know, when I list the contaminants that are in the Passaic River, and when I see what industrialization, and you certainly know better than I, of what it's done to this river, which was a great recreational place, great commerce place, and now has become stagnant, although we're beginning to move forward. What ever happened to the thought of trying to deregulate the EPA or trying to get the EPA out of the business? What the heck would it be, the Passaic River, without the regulations that were put in place?
Well, I think without an EPA, the Passaic River would be even more contaminated than it is today. It would probably be on fire, and there'd be absolutely no hope.
And that's happened throughout the United States.
Yeah, I'm not making that up. Ohio.
In Ohio.
Yeah.
The river, the lake and the river was just exploded.
Yeah. So my experience is, in Washington, people generically talk about pulling back EPA's authority, but in communities where people live, people want EPA stronger. They want the Superfund cleanups to happen faster. Right. They want air pollution reduced. They see the connection between a cleaner environment and great opportunity to create jobs and have economic growth. I mean, imagine the Passaic River if we could safely canoe on it. If you could eat the fish that's caught in it.
Can't do that now. Absolutely
not. Do not eat fish or crabs.
Mercury in that water.
Yeah, really toxic. And we're worried, particularly that we know people do eat crabs and fish from the Passaic, especially new immigrants to the country.
Right.
We've got to make sure that people know today it's not safe. But I think when thinking of this multi-billion-dollar Superfund cleanup, I like the way you've started this conversation. What can the river be?
Yeah. Do you really think this could be cleaned up, this river?
Not only do I think it will be, I pledge to you, EPA will clean up the Passaic River. EPA has experience all over the country. I spent a lot of time getting the Hudson River cleaned
Yes,
up
you
of
worked on that
PCBs.
project.
I worked on it all of my
General
adult.
Electric dumped everything into the Hudson River and screwed that river up
My
pretty good.
whole adult life, I've worked on PCB cleanup on the Hudson, and guess what? We're about a year away from finishing that project. We're going to take that experience on the Hudson and make it work on the Passaic.
What makes the Passaic a more difficult task than you had in the great Hudson River?
Passaic is harder because Hudson River was just PCBs and just one polluter, GE. Here we have about 100 different contaminants. 100 different contaminants, 100 different polluters.
New Jersey's equal opportunity polluters all over the place.
Well, it is a full employment act for the lobbyists and lawyers for the companies that created this contamination. And my real plea to them is for them to start cooperating and stop the foot dragging.
So we have a very different problem on the Passaic River than we did with the Hudson River.
Well, actually, GE fought the cleanup of the Hudson for years. They spent a huge amount on advertising.
What was their argument?
Their argument was the dredging was going to make the river more contaminated than if we just let it sit at much less cost to GE. But now that we're almost at the end of the story, we know that dredging the Hudson has been a huge success environmentally and also has created 500 new jobs in upstate New York.
Administrator, please correct me if I'm wrong. Why, you know, we're starting the cleanup from the bay, Newark Bay, up to Belleville, Newark boundary. The major polluter of all the over 100 polluters is what company?
Well, Occidental, which is now known as Terra Solutions.
Is that where they made Agent Orange?
Agent Orange was made on Lister Avenue in Newark, New Jersey,
which
right
is
on
real
the banks.
hot spot.
Really hot spot, and EPA has already gone in there and
But
dealt
there's a
with
lot of
that.
other companies, obviously.
Yes.
So we're doing that from the bay to Belleville and Newark border, and then you have from Newark Belleville border up to the Dundee. That'll be the next section.
Right.
Most of the pollutants are in those first 8 miles.
Yes, you're
of the
right.
entire river.
You're
all the way
absolutely
into
right.
Morris County, correct?
90% of the contamination is in the lower 8 miles, and that's why EPA came out with a plan last April on cleaning up that part of the river
Tell
first.
us about the plan.
Well, it's a great plan. It's one of the biggest Superfund cleanups that EPA will ever do. It will remove 4.3 million cubic yards of contaminated sediment or mud from the bottom of the river. We want to get started soon. We put the plan out for public comments. Hundreds of people put in public comments, and by the end of this year, we will have a final proposal.
In 2016,
2015.
We will have a final proposal to do those first
8 miles.
8 miles.
Which is essentially bank-to-bank river dredging. Get that contaminated sediment out. It's very complicated, but EPA's done this before. We know what we're doing.
Where did I read that dredging could fill Giant Stadium twice?
At least.
At least.
Yeah. Yeah. What you do is you pull out the mud,
Right.
and then you de-water it, kind of like a French press coffee filter.
You do that on site?
We do that on the banks of the
Right.
river, and then we clean that water, discharge it back into the Passaic, and then the contaminated sediment or mud will be sent away to a permitted commercial disposal facility because it's really toxic.
In country?
Somewhere in the United States.
Somewhere in the United States. So.
And it's up to the polluters.
And those are highly regulated as well.
Oh yeah, by EPA. So it's
Yes.
up to the polluters to decide where they want to send it, but it has to go to a permitted licensed facility.
When will we actually see, with this plan that the EPA is developing, will continue to develop, an improvement in this river? When, you know, what's your best judgment?
Yeah.
You're not a fortune teller, and I'm not either.
Yeah, it'll take decades.
It will.
Quite honestly, it's not going to be overnight. Remember, it took 150 years to create this
Right.
contamination.
It's not gonna go away.
It's built up in the food chain.
Yeah.
So what EPA tries to do is get to the source of the pollution, address it,
Right.
and give the ecosystem some time to recover.
What are we doing to stop any further polluting
Yeah.
of the Passaic River?
Well,
we know how bad it is.
right.
But how do we stop further pollution? What do we have in place now that we didn't have in place before?
We have really important federal environmental laws that Congress passed and EPA enforces. So we have the Clean Water Act, we have the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So the discharge that happened for so many years, the dumping, that is not happening today.
Right.
And that's why you need a strong EPA to make sure that we're not creating a new generation of toxic problems.
Now, I've been in the Congress since January 97. I know who the shakers are. I know who the fakers are. I know which administration has attempted to do something about these contaminants and contaminated places, whether they be on land or in the water, all over the country. I do know in the previous administration, we almost had an 8-year hiatus of doing anything substantial. Am I using hyperbole, or is this basically a fact?
Well, every administration has different priorities, and I really just want to speak to the Obama administration because that's who I work for. And we have
President put you there.
Yes, and we have made cleaning up the Passaic a real priority, along with other water bodies. There's also sort of been a maturation of the Superfund program. We've typically dealt with land properties. You've been involved in countless Superfund cleanups.
I sure have.
All
I could
over
write a book on it.
Yeah, you should. But now EPA is cleaning up the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn, Newtown Creek in New York City. I mentioned the Hudson River. That's where people live. Millions.
Oh, shouldn't that be a priority, though? Why would it not be a priority to make things healthier?
Yeah.
And to give life to what is part of water and land?
I think it should be a priority for every administration. And in fact, some of the real advances in terms of improving air pollution came when President George Herbert Walker Bush signed amendments to the Clean Air Act, 1990. We've cut air pollution by about 60 to 70% in this country because of the Clean Air Act. I just gave a talk in upstate New York at my alma mater, the College of St. Rose, last week on climate change. And I showed a picture of Manhattan before the Clean Air Act and after the Clean Air Act. And it's stunning.
Tangible evidence.
Yeah, and so for people who think...
And it came out of the first Bush's administration.
The amendments came out of the first Bush.
Was going around. Less interested, maybe that's why he lost the re-election, but you know, I think he did tried to do a pretty good job in responding to what the nation's needs were.
Yeah. And guess who created the EPA? Guess what president established the EPA right out of the gate? Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon, yeah. Well,
so what we
did a lot of things on poverty too, Richard Nixon.
We need a bipartisan commitment to protecting the environment because all we really want for our kids and our grandchildren are clean air and clean water. But we got to make it a priority. Yeah, and we need people like you fighting in Congress, which I really appreciate because it's falling down.
But if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Yeah, and EPA has really fallen down the list of priorities, and so if you don't fully fund Superfund, for instance, you don't get to clean up the Passaic River.
Well, I've thought one of my major responsibilities when I raised my hand back in January of '97 was to clean up the land and to clean up the waters. We worked hard at that, you know, stopping development on some of these rivers, which have led to, you know, much of the contamination. You know, the water's got to go someplace, and maybe that's another subject, flooding. But the fact of the matter is, there needs to be some regulation in here. We don't want too much regulation. We don't want to dampen the possibilities of economic growth. But we want to take care of folks. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, and we want to take care of people who, for instance, fish in the Passaic because that's their only source of affordable protein. We've got to think about people who are economically struggling, who want to take their kids to a park on a hot summer day. Why can't they jump into the river and swim? They can't today, but a few decades down the road, once we get this cleanup done, we want to live up to the goals of the Clean Water Act, which is fishable, swimmable waters. We can have that in New Jersey.
Administrator, I'm so proud to work with you on many of these areas. It's not easy. No one said it was going to be easy. But it's worth it. I mean, I talked to people, for instance, in Wayne, New Jersey, where we did cleanups up there. It was a terrible situation, Black Oak Ridge Road. And now we're going to have a park there. We have a dog run. We have a lot of things. We can do this.
Right.
And if we do it smartly, we can do it efficiently as well.
Right. And I just want to take a moment to thank you for your leadership in the Congress. You really know the details, you know what's going on in your district, and your voice has been really, really appreciated on a number of things, the Passaic River and others.
You know you can count on me.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for being here today.
Sure.
We could talk another 2 hours on this, which we have talked. We want to invite you back again, and when we get this plan at the end of the year, when it's completed, count on my support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Administrator Judith Enck, and thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it, and
My
all
pleasure.
that you do for your country.
Thank you, Congressman.
Not just us
Thank you.
in New Jersey. Thank you. And we'll be back in a moment or so with our good colonel from the Army Corps of Engineers. So stay tuned about the Passaic River. It's our river. And we're back. Joining me now to continue our conversation on the Passaic River is Colonel Paul Owen with the Army Corps of Engineers. Colonel Paul Owen assumed command of the New York District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in September of 2012. Colonel Owen oversees the Corps water resource development, navigation, and regulatory activities in the northeastern New Jersey, as well as parts of New York and Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Colonel Owen also holds the title of Supervisor of the New York Harbor. I like that. I like that. A West Point graduate with advanced degrees from Missouri University of Science and Technology and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Colonel Owen has led commands throughout the United States, Germany, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We will shift gears a bit, discuss the Corps' efforts to address flooding along the Passaic, and thank you for being here, Colonel. We're so proud of you, and I want to thank you for all your service to your country.
Well, thank you very much.
You've been there, you've done it, and now you're in a very responsible position, heavily responsible, to have to deal with congressmen like myself and trying to get things done on subjects and problems that go back many, many years, correct?
That's correct. And Passaic River has been a problem that's been around for a long time, as you well know, and it's
Yes.
a difficult problem, combined with a lot of factors. You know, your previous guests, and we have to talked about the toxic problems and the pollution that we have to deal with as part of the flood control project too.
Right. And the toxins that are in that river, and the dioxins and the PCBs, et cetera, and mercury, make it even more imperative that we do something about the flooding, because that all goes on to the land.
That's correct.
And right now, there's so many factories and homes that are built on our rivers that there's a lot of damage done, a great, great, great cost. So how are we going to solve this problem?
Well, it's a tough problem, and you know, just to go back to that too, I mean, we see, as in the harbor, we see the pollution that comes from the Passaic River and the sediment that builds up in the harbor. It's much more expensive to get rid of polluted sediment in the harbor. So usually it's about, you know, $10 a cubic yard for material that's not polluted. It's about $100 a cubic yard for material that is polluted. So 10 times more expensive to get rid of material that kind of sifts down through the Passaic River into the New York Harbor, and we have to keep that at a certain depth to allow for the ships to come in and unload their goods. So extremely important to the economy, and the quicker we find a solution to help with the sediment and the contamination, we'll see some economic benefits.
So this is a two-prong attack. We developed a two-prong attack here. One on getting the contaminants out of the river so that it can return to the glory days of recreational, you know, fishing, the whole gambit here. On the other hand, we're trying to stop the flooding, which is eternal, it looks like.
Right.
It's gone on forever, making it worse, of course, the development along the rivers where the water's got to go someplace. It's got to go someplace. So the Corps developed 5 or 6 plans, and you looked into, investigated what you thought the best plan was going to be.
Right.
Am I right so far?
Yes, that's true.
With those of us on your back all the time, and as well as our previous guest, Administrator Enck from the EPA, to try to get things done and not just talk about them. You know, people are tired of hearing these. They're tired of hearing about, here's the solution to flooding. 100 years later, we have no solution.
Right.
So, are you optimistic about this?
We definitely optimistic. I mean, there's some great engineering solutions that are out there that we think will work. They're expensive, and not everybody's going to be happy with every decision. So, whatever we end up doing, somebody will probably have some concerns about whether you have a flood wall in your backyard or a tunnel going underneath your house. We've discussed those things, and whether it's going to provide the level of risk reduction that people are looking for. So. But it's expensive, and this, as I've been across the country, this area is clearly unique and the most densely populated area of the country. And
got
to
2.5 million people here.
And that's
on
a mess.
This river.
Yeah, and that's 20,000 structures, I think it is, that are in the floodplain that we need to deal with, and represented by over $1 billion worth of damages in the last storm and Hurricane Irene. So,
Irene, yeah. Irene was very damaging to this area.
I think that's the message that I really try to talk to people from outside this region that they don't fully understand, is the really dense population and the nature of the northern New Jersey in general, and the risks there are to peoples and homes and structure that are
It's tough to educate people from Montana,
right,
who think everybody that Montana is New Jersey.
Right.
Well, it's not, and we don't have the open spaces here.
Right.
We could put the water someplace if we did.
Right.
And find some better means.
Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis, and the Mississippi River is a little bit different animal, and you have places to build big levees and to spread out, and you just don't have that here in New Jersey.
And when I was discussing this with the administrator, we're talking about the pollution side of it. This is a very unique river. Every river is unique. You don't address each river the same. He's talking about the Hudson River, which is being cleaned up too, which will be done very shortly. And what had to be done there, that was only 1 or 2 contaminants.
Right.
The Passaic River, we have a potpourri of contaminants all over the place.
And it winds through all these towns. I mean, the Hudson River, very broad, very big. It's kind of in a, a steep gap where the river flows through. So Passaic is certainly very unique. So.
Yeah. What do you think are some of our more reliable solutions to this problem?
The Passaic, again, one of the unique parts of the Passaic is it has 2 different types of storms that impact the area. You have the coastal storm, like Hurricane Sandy, which floods the tidal area in areas like Kearney and down where we saw the impacts in the Passaic wastewater treatment plant and those areas. So we're actually able to address that a little quicker. So we've broken that out from the Passaic main stem study. And we're going to do a project that is a series of about 10 miles worth of flood walls and levees in that area, from Newark Bay up to Dundee Dam, which will protect against the which will protect against the surge waters that tend to come from the ocean or from the bay side.
Right.
Now the other part is the Passaic main stem, which is floods more from rain type events like Hurricane Irene. So you get the best of both worlds. You get hurricane events from Hurricane Irene that floods the river from rainwater, and then you get coastal storm events like Hurricane Sandy that floods because of storm surge.
Well, in the Sandy, 2 towns in my district, Moonachie and Little Ferry, were literally wiped out because of the surge up the Hackensack. The burns were destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, those people, some of them are still not back in their homes. I mean, it's pretty devastating. So that's one kind of flooding. And then, of course, we didn't have a lot of rain during Sandy.
Right.
Thank God. I mean, or else Passaic would have been in the same position, folks who live along the Passaic, as the people who live along the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, we weren't quite sure where Sandy was going to hit. And I remember the day before the storm, I was at the Pompton Lakes Dam thinking this was going to be, we're going to get 4 or 5 inches of rain and we were going to have a big river flooding event. And it didn't quite turn out that way. The surge ended up being the dominant feature of that storm.
And flooding is so peculiar, though. I remember being up at the dam with the governor a couple of years ago. Well, I'm not an engineer. I don't pretend to be one. But I do know if you stop water one place, it's got to go another place. So where's the water going to go? Well, it's not going to go in my backyard. It'll go in their backyard.
Right. So that was interesting. I remember that day. I think I remember meeting you. That was right after I took command, and I was learning all about the Passaic River. And
So what are the options here?
Okay.
The tunnel,
so
which
for the
we
Passaic,
talked about in the 80s,
right,
which was not acceptable. primarily because of cost and where it was going to go, that tunnel.
Right.
What other options?
So the tunnel, it was originally authorized underneath the Water Resource Development Act of 1990, and then later, the mid-90s, I think we learned that there was some opposition to the tunnel. So it was basically, we weren't permitted to further study the tunnel through, so we had started looking at other alternatives, which included the levees and flood wall options.
You think that's the direction we're going to be moving in?
So we're working with the state right now. The third option is on this is a non-structural plan, which is a little less ambitious.
Raise the homes.
And people that are in the 10-year floodplain would get have their homes elevated.
But that's only 10 years.
It would provide about a 100-year level of risk reduction, but it's only for people that are in 10 years. So with each option, you have different people that are going to be impacted or benefit from the.
There's a fourth option.
What's that?
Do nothing.
You're right. And then everybody, and nobody wins in that situation, right?
We can't.
So,
We've lost too much property.
Yeah.
We've lost personnel. This is too dangerous for us to just let it, by grace of God, go away.
Yeah.
Flooding is not going to go away. I am proud that you're trying to address it, Colonel. I have total confidence in you. We worked together on some things, and I have total confidence.
Yeah.
I tell my audience I have confidence. You know, when I say that, I mean it. I'm not just blowing smoke here. The question is getting all the levels to work together.
Right.
And I want to be an assistance to you in that regard, to get folks to work together. That's not going to be easy, but you took the job.
Yeah. Well,
and I did too.
Yeah. We're using our time and money right now to refine the levee and flood wall plan. We have a lot of good data on the tunnel, so we kind of know that one. We need to develop the data on the levees and flood walls to come up with an analysis that helps the state of New Jersey make a final determination on what
we're
they exactly want to do.
We're going to have to educate the public what that means too.
Right.
Because the levees are going to be higher in some areas and lower. And how come it's higher up there and lower down here? And how are we going to ever see the river?
Right.
So, Colonel, thank you so much for your time. And again, thank you for your service to your country. We're very proud of you.
Can I add one more thing,
Sure.
Congressman? You mentioned Little Ferry and Moonachie as places that we didn't have any core authorizations or projects there, but we recently completed the North Atlantic Coast Comprehensive Study, and it identifies 9 focus areas for further investigation. And one of them is going to be called New York and New Jersey harbor and tributaries.
Right.
So there's a potential that, we will, underneath that study, look at areas like Moonachie and Little Ferry that were damaged by
folks
Hurricane
are going to be happy to hear that.
We're a few years away. That's not going to happen tomorrow.
I know.
But we did get money in the President's FY16 budget to study this, and we look forward to coming up with a solution for that.
Thank you for relating that to us. I want to thank you for watching this edition of To The Point. You've heard our thoughts. Now I would like to hear what you think about today's show. If you have any comments, concerns, or questions, stay tuned. Our address, phone number, and website address will appear in a moment. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time on To The Point.